Welcome to Plain Living Homestead. I'm Kim, and today I'm going to tell you all about fabric and how to buy it. If you see me looking at my phone, just know that I've got a list of notes to make sure that I tell you everything that I plan to tell you. First things first, how do you know how much fabric and what type of fabric to buy? Now, if you're using a printed commercial pattern, it's going to tell you exactly what kind of fabric you can use for that project. So for example, this says suggested fabrics: poplin, cotton blends, denim, and sateen. All of these are woven fabrics that have a nice drape and are meant to make clothing out of. It doesn't recommend stretchy fabrics. So what does that mean, woven? Well, there's two main types of fabric. There's woven fabric and there's knit fabric. Woven fabric is just that. The machine takes warp threads that go vertically and then weaves in and out of the warp threads, the weft threads, and then compresses them on a loom to create a solid piece of fabric. Knit fabrics use loops of thread that interlock with one another, which gives it wiggle room and provides the stretch. Knit fabrics tend to have an additional elastic component like lycra or spandex to help give it a stretch. I'll show you a few samples of types of fabric that I have here. So one type is gauze fabric, and you will see it's got this crinkled texture. It's very lightweight. It's a little bit thinner than regular cotton. It doesn't actually stretch once you get to the full width of the fabric. And you'll see how it drapes. It's very loose and flowy. Drape refers to how does the fabric hang, and that's going to be helpful when you're determining if you're going to make clothes or a quilt or a handbag. You'll know whether you want a nice flowy drape or something that's a little more stiff. So this is gauze fabric and it's got that texture to it. This is quilting cotton. Quilting cotton is a little bit different from other 100% cottons, purely because it's intended for quilt making, so it's got a lot more colors and prints and designs available, and it tends to be a little bit cheaper than other high-end fabrics. For example, you may find other natural fibers like bamboo and linen and wool that are very high priced, and you wouldn't necessarily want to put them in a quilt that's going to be used over and over and over again and get a lot of wear and tear. They would be fine for that, but that's not really the main go-to. And those types of fabrics don't typically come in a lot of different color options. So this is quilting cotton. You'll see it's got a pretty nice drape, but it does have a good bit of body to it. Now, this gauze would be good for things like baby blankets, lightweight summer dresses, or maybe certain accessories that you're gonna make, or if a pattern specifically calls for that. Quilting cotton, even though it's called quilting cotton, is not specifically reserved for making quilts. It's really an all-purpose fabric. It's great for making handbags, clothing, accessories, cloth napkins, all sorts of things. There's just so many things you can do with quilting cotton. So just remember that that is a really good all-around fabric. Then we have canvas fabric, which is almost like an outdoor fabric. It's woven with a little bit thicker threads and a little bit looser weave. So when you look close at this fabric, you can actually see the individual threads of the warp and the weft. Whereas when you look at this quilting cotton, if you look really close, you can see them, but the threads themselves are much smaller and the spacing is much tighter, where each time a weft thread was woven through, it was pushed tighter together compared to this canvas. Now, canvas is really good for things that are going to take a lot of wear and tear, usually for things like curtains and upholstery. I'm going to make some curtains out of this particular fabric. It would also be really good for the back of a quilt if you wanted it to be like a picnic quilt that was going to go on the ground a lot. Or it would be great for handbags that are going to be carried in and out of the home quite a bit. It could also be used for other accessories depending on what your project is, and it would make a great apron because it is a little more heavy duty. Okay. Now for knit fabrics. Knit fabrics, again, instead of being woven, the threads are looped together, which means they have a little bit of give and additional thread in the fabric, which just allows it to stretch out. One type of knit fabric is a French terry. So this is made of cotton with a little bit of spandex. You'll see it has quite a bit of stretch in it. And on the back side, you can actually see the loops. It's very similar to a sweater material, but these loops are a little bit tighter than what would be on the inside of something like a hoodie. This is really good for making clothing, especially kids clothing. Something like this, I might make a hooded sweater or a fall or wintertime t-shirt or long sleeve t-shirt, or pants, leggings, pajamas, those sorts of things. It adds a little bit of warmth because it does have that looping on the back, but it's nice and soft and stretchy. Another type of knit fabric is double brushed poly. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as DBP. Double brushed poly is like buttery soft leggings. It's got a really good stretch to it. It's going to stretch really far. This is really good for things that are tight fitting, like baby clothes, like pajamas. It's also really good, depending on the drape of it, you can get different weights of the fabric, and typically it's a good thing to get a sample of if you're ordering online, or to go into the store and to take some off of the bolt and stretch it, see how it drapes. This would make a really cute little skirt or a ruffled peplum shirt. It's great for all kinds of things like that. It's also really good for headbands and turbans. Another type of knit fabric is cotton lycra. This is almost just like your basic t-shirt fabric. It is cotton and it's got a spandex type material called lycra, which is basically a name brand, woven into it to give it the stretch. And you'll see it's got a really good stretch to it, but it has a little bit less of a return. So the return is how quickly does it bounce back to its original size. And if it doesn't have a great return, it tends to stay stretched out once you've stretched it. So this double brush poly, it's got a really good return because no matter how many times I stretch this out, it doesn't stay stretched. It always goes right back to its original size. Whereas this lycra, the more I pull on it and stretch on it and put wear and tear on it, it's going to start to stay stretched out. This cotton lycra is good for any type of clothing item, headbands, accessories. So once you know what type of fabric you want to sew with, the next thing you need to do is determine how much of it that you actually need. If you're using a commercial pattern, they make it really easy and they just tell you how many yards you need. So you want to decide which size you need. So for example, on this dress pattern, I believe I wear a size 16, which for view B, which view B is the one that I would want to make, if I made view B in a size 16, I can look at this chart and I'm going to find size 16. I'm going to go down to view B and it gives me two options. It says if I have 45-inch wide fabric, then I'm going to need 3 1/4 yards. But if I have 60-inch wide fabric, I'm going to need 2 5/8 of a yard. So what that means is how much fabric is on the bolt. Now, typically things like cotton and canvas and all-purpose fabrics, they're going to come on a bolt where the fabric is 45 inches wide. So that means from selvage to selvage across the width of the fabric, and this is doubled up, it's folded in half on the bolt, it's going to be somewhere between 40 and 45 inches. If that's how wide my fabric is, then I'm going to buy, it says 3 1/4. Now keep in mind, that's for the best, most efficient use of the fabric, and you have to lay out your pattern pieces exactly how they tell you to use that small amount of fabric. I typically add at least half a yard to give myself some wiggle room, and then I have extras if I make a mistake or if I want to make some matching accessories later on. Then it also tells me if I buy 60-inch fabric. Now typically 60-inch fabric, it'll come on a longer bolt or a long roll like wrapping paper, and it's typically apparel fabric and some upholstery fabrics. They'll be 60 inches wide instead of 45. Naturally, if you have wider fabric, you need less of it. So it would tell me here that I need 2 5/8 of a yard. I would probably go ahead and buy 3 or 3 1/4, maybe even 3 1/2, so that I had a little bit of wiggle room and that extra fabric. There's nothing worse than getting your pattern out, cutting all the pieces, and realizing that you're short, or going back to the store and that fabric is sold out and there's nothing you can do about it. The next thing you might be doing is a pattern like a handbag pattern that tells you to measure out squares and rectangles and sometimes even triangles and how many of those you need. In that case, you need to do a little bit of math. So for example, if you're going to make cloth napkins and you want them to be 18 inches square, first let's think about how many napkins we want to make. I would like to make a set of 4 cloth napkins, 18 inches by 18 inches. So I know that the width of my fabric from selvage to selvage is 40 to 44 inches. We'll say 40 just to make sure that we're not overestimating. So in 40 inches, I can get 2 napkins, 18 inches, and have a little bit left over. So I know I can get 2 across the width. And then I know that the length, I'm going to measure in yards. So if I go 18 inches and then another 18 inches, that's going to be 36 inches, which is 1 yard. So from 1 yard of fabric, I could cut 4 cloth napkins. Let me roll out some fabric and show you exactly what that looks like. Okay, it can be a little bit confusing because when you get fabric on a bolt like this, it's folded in half. So let's unroll some. Take a look at what this fabric actually looks like. So when you take the fabric off the bolt, it's actually folded over double on itself. So the width of the fabric is actually this whole 40 inches. Let me unroll a little bit more and show you how we would measure our cloth napkins that way. Okay, so once we are ready to cut our cloth napkins, we would lay this out. Okay, and my ruler here is 18 inches. So we would start here. We don't want to include the selvage because we don't want those rough edges or the unprinted edges in our project. So there's 18 inches there. I come here, I would get another 18 inches with about 6 to 8 inches to spare on the end. So then I just need to know what length of fabric I need. So if my square napkin, remember I get a napkin here and a napkin here. Each one is going to be 18 inches from the edge. There's 1. Let's take that and move it up. There's 2. Now I know off the top of my head that 18 times 2 is 36, and that is 1 yard of fabric. So here's our 1 yard of fabric. We know that we would need 1 yard to make 4 napkins, but let's look at when that is actually folded up on the bolt. It's going to look about like this. So you would have 18 inches here, and don't forget that's actually going to cover 2 napkins because now that we folded it up like it comes on the bolt, we've got 2 layers, and then another 18 inches, and we would get 1 yard of fabric. So a 1 yard cut would be 40 inches by 36 inches. Sometimes it can be helpful to just get a piece of paper and sketch out the fabric and draw yourself a rectangle and show that it's 40 inches wide, and then go ahead and start marking out the pieces that you need and make measurements to determine what length of fabric you would want. All right, now that we're talking about patterns and the fact that the patterns tell you how much fabric you need, let's talk about notions. If you've never sewn before, or if you've never shopped for sewing supplies, you might say, notions, what are notions? Because that word means something different to us normally. Notions are all the little extras and supplies that go into making a project. So for example, notions could include things like thread, needles, buttons, lace, interfacing, trim, and zippers. So if you're using a commercial pattern, when you read on the chart how much fabric you need, it'll also tell you what notions you need. So, for example, here for view B, you need 1 1/4 yards of fusible interfacing. So interfacing is a type of thin material that you iron or sew onto your fabric to give it a little bit more stiffness or durability. Fusible means that it's got glue on one side and you can iron it onto your fabric so that it becomes one piece of fabric as you're sewing the pattern. Below the chart, it says notions needed, and for each view, it tells you different things. So for example, for one view, you need 9 1/2-inch buttons. For another view, you need a 1 1/2-inch buckle. Then of course, you're always going to want thread, and you want to pick your thread one of two ways. Well, really three ways. You either want matching thread that is the exact color of, if you have solid color fabric, you want your thread to match as close as possible, or the color that blends in the most to the colors on your fabric. The second way to choose thread is a coordinating thread, which would be, for example, a gray. A gray color would coordinate with this, and it might contrast with the blues, but it would blend in with the grays and creams. The third way to choose your thread color is to choose a contrasting thread. So a contrasting color is one that goes with it, but will stand out if you want to do a pretty top stitching or some sort of detail that you want people to notice. For example, on this, not that I want to, but I could do like a bright red or a hot pink or a black, something that would really stand out against the background of this fabric. Now, to pick your notions, there's usually an aisle or some sort of center display where it'll have all sorts of buttons and zippers and trim and things like that that you can pick, and you just want to get what your pattern tells you to get. Okay, now that you know how much fabric you need, what kind of fabric you need, and you have a list of notions for your project, now you have to actually go to the store and buy it. Now, I remember as a beginner seamstress going into Hobby Lobby or Joann and being so intimidated because I had no idea what to do. You walk into a store and there's just rows and rows and rows of fabric stacked up, and nobody's around, or maybe a bunch of people are around and you think they're all staring at you, and you have no idea what to do. I'm going to tell you what to do so that you can walk in with confidence and not have to be afraid of the fabric store. So the first thing you need to know is how most fabric is arranged. When you go into a store like Joann or Hobby Lobby, fabric is going to be grouped in like materials, so all the quilting cotton together, all of the flannel together, all of the knit fabrics together, and they'll usually be marked with some sort of sign. If there are no signs, or if you're not sure, just walk over, pull one of the bolts off the shelf, and look at the ends. The ends of the bolt almost always have an information sticker that tells you the type of fabric, what collection it's in, the brand name, how much, like the percentage of the materials, and then the price, and that's really important too. So don't be afraid to pull a bolt off the wall and just read the information on it. Another way they might be grouped is by seasonal fabric. So a lot of times for spring, fall, 4th of July, Christmas, any sort of holiday that there is a fabric, you're going to find those grouped together. And it may be a mixture of, for example, Christmas time, you might find cotton, flannel, knits, and even some tulle all mixed together on the same shelf, but it's all going to be Christmas themed. Okay, and that goes for any holiday or any theme. So what you're going to do is you're going to find the section with the type of fabric that you want, browse through and pick the color or the print that you like, and you're going to take this whole bolt off the shelf and carry it with you, either in your buggy or just in your hands. And if you're getting multiple fabrics, don't be afraid to just load up your buggy and push these bolts around with you. Nobody's going to look at you like you're crazy. They don't think you're stealing the fabric. That's expected. Then, once you have all your fabric picked out and you know how much you want, you're going to find the cutting table. Now, the cutting table can sometimes be at the end of the store or right in the center of the fabric section. It's hard to miss, though, because it's a very large counter. There's usually some sort of sign. There's usually something to get in touch with the employees, whether it's a computer screen or a bell, or a lot of times they're already there. And then there's always some sort of cutting device, whether it's some of cutting tables have a little strip that's made into the table. It's a groove where they can set their scissors in it and cut a perfectly straight line. It's also going to have a large ruler down one side where they measure the fabric. So you're going to take all of your bolts, and be careful because some cutting ladies are very particular and they don't want all your bolts on their cutting table. So just ask, should I set them here or should I leave them in my cart? Do whatever they say. Sometimes they just want one bolt at a time. So you're going to set it on their table and they're going to say, how much of this one? What they mean by that is how many yards. Now, most stores will allow you to go as small as 1/4 or 1/8 of a yard. Sometimes they'll tell you, no, you have to get a little bit more than that. But typically, you're going to buy 1/2 to 1 yard or much larger quantities. So you're gonna say, I need 1 yard, please. And they're gonna do this. They're gonna take it and they're gonna lay it out on their table and they're gonna flop it like this. And then they're gonna take it on their table and measure it. And they're gonna have an exact spot where 1 yard is. And they're gonna take it with their scissors or their rotary cutter or their electric cutter and they're gonna cut 1 yard off. And then they're gonna take your 1 yard and fold it up nice and neat and either write on a receipt or type into a little handheld machine that you got the blue striped canvas fabric that was $12.99 a yard and you got 1 yard of it. And they're gonna give you your fabric and your receipt to take to the register and pay. Then with the remainder of the bolt, you're just gonna leave that there, don't worry about it. They're gonna fold it up, they're gonna pin the fabric back down, and they're gonna go put that up for you. So don't feel awkward or uncomfortable that you're leaving, even if you got 30 fabrics, they're gonna go put the rest of it up after you get all of your cuts. Okay, now as far as I know, there are no limits on how much you can buy. So if you need a lot of fabric, I suggest trying to find a new bolt, and sometimes it'll still be wrapped up. And on the end, on the information, it'll tell you how much comes on a new bolt. So for example, this one has 9 yards. Now I did purchase the entire bolt on purpose because a lot of fabric stores will give you an additional discount if you buy the entire bolt at once because they don't have to cut it, they don't have to handle it, they just ship it to you or they just hand it to you at the store and there's no labor involved. So for example, I'm gonna make curtains and maybe some other decor for my kitchen that I wanted to all match, and this was on sale. It's normally $12.99. I think it was $3.99 when I bought it. Another thing that you might consider if you need smaller pieces or if you are going to do a lot of different fabrics is to look at fat quarters and remnants. Okay, so a fat quarter, let me roll out 1 yard of fabric here. Okay, so here's 1 yard of fabric. There's 18 inches. Let's go a little bit more. And another 18 inches. Okay, so 1 yard is roughly about right here at the edge of my ruler. So if you were to go and buy 1/4 of a yard, a 1/4 yard of fabric, let's see. Okay, if you were to go to the cutting counter and ask for 1/4 yard of fabric, they're going to measure a 9-inch strip that is the complete width of the fabric. So, for example, here is just a regular cut of 1/4 yard, and here's another one. So you get this long, skinny strip that if you were making cloth napkins, this wouldn't have the surface area that you need. If you were making clothing, this wouldn't be big enough for any of the pieces. If you were making some sort of handbag, you know, you might be able to make some of your pieces, but this is not going to be like the main body piece or a significant portion of it. For a fat quarter, what they would do is they're going to cut 1/2 yard of fabric right off the bolt. So it'll be 1/2 yard wide, the width of the fabric. So you see here, I've got this piece that's cut. Let's move this over. So they've cut this 1/2 yard. Then they're going to take it and they're going to cut it right down the middle on the lengthwise. So you end up with 2 pieces. Let's see. You'll have 2 pieces that are the equivalent of a 1/4 yard. But instead of the long skinny strip, now we have 18 inches by 20 inches. So here's a selvage and here's a selvage. This was a 1/2 yard. When we cut it in half, that makes it a 1/4. But instead of the long skinny 1/4, we get a fat 1/4. And this allows you to pay for the price of a 1/4 yard, but get this surface area where you can cut out bigger pieces, you can get more in there. It's a little bit more useful for certain projects. And a lot of times these come, actually all the time that I know of, these are gonna come pre-cut and you can buy them individually. But another cool thing about fat quarters is they'll have them folded up all cute, usually in a little pack like this. And maybe a pack of fat quarters might have 10 different fabrics in it. And they'll all come stacked up together and they'll be in a cute little bundle or package. And all of the fabrics in that bundle, they're gonna match or coordinate in some way. So you already know that everything goes together and coordinates. So for example, you could buy a pack of 10 fat quarters and make each one into a cloth napkin and have a beautiful set of mix and match cloth napkins. So that's a fun way to make sure that your fabrics match and coordinate for a project where you don't need a bunch of the same thing and you just need small sections of fabric. So just one more time for a visual. You have a fat quarter that's 18 by 20 compared to a regular quarter yard of fabric that is 9 by 40 to 44 depending on the fabric. Okay, one more way to get cheap fabric is to take the remnants off of a bolt or to check the remnants bin. After you buy fabric, they're gonna take the remainder, roll it back up and put it back on the shelf. So if this bolt started with 9 yards and I bought 3 yards, there's still 6 yards left on the bolt and they're gonna go put it up on the shelf. Now, if the fabric that you choose has, say, 1.5 yards left on it and you ask for 1 yard, you're gonna go to the cutting table, they're gonna unroll it, they're gonna cut your 1 yard off, and there's only gonna be 1/2 yard left. A lot of stores will ask you, would you like this remnant for half price? And because it's the last little piece on the bolt and it's gonna be hard for them to sell, they'll give you a discount on it. If you choose not to take it, they're gonna go ahead and they're gonna fold it up and they're gonna put a clearance tag on it and they're gonna mark it down, whatever their discount is, and then there's gonna be a bin full of all of those little remnants that were the last piece on a bolt that weren't worth putting back up. So you always check that remnants bin to see what you can find because there's all kinds of goodies.